Economist Richard Wolff says the only way to deal with inequality is to give workers a greater say in the production process and the distribution of profits. Wolff is professor of economics emeritus, University of Massachusetts Amherst. He is also a visiting professor at the New School University in New York City.
There's an enormous shift going on in world capitalism, easily described as follows. The big multinational corporations that were so successful for the last 150 years in Western Europe, in the United States, and in Japan. In the process of struggling to grow, they had to come to terms with their unions and their workers, and wages and standards of living in those parts of the world grew. At the same time, because of imperialism and colonialism and all the relationships with the third world, conditions there deteriorated. Make a long story short, comes the end of the 20th century, these corporations realize that they could make much more profits basically by leaving the United States, Europe, and Japan and moving to India, China, Brazil, and a whole host of other countries to take advantage of the enormous difference, above all, in wage rates and what they have to pay their workers. The interesting condition of China is this. They are at least on the receiving end of capital movement. They're the place where investment is booming. They're the place where growth has been spectacular for decades. So they're in a position to say to the mass of their people, your standard of living is rising. Granted, not as much as those at the top. And even the Chinese leadership has been acutely aware and speaking about the problem of growing inequality of wealth. But it's one thing to have that in China while the mass standard of living is rising. It's a very different situation in Europe and North America, where inequality is rising, but the mass standard of living is falling. And that difference is shaping global politics, including the relationships, for example, between China and the United States, China and Europe. You can see that in the trade disputes that have exploded and so on. This is a very different position that China occupies, more advantageous than in the West, but the inequality problem is a continuing real problem on both sides. If you're going to deal with income inequality, you've got to go to the root. And here's the root. In every enterprise, a vast number of people produce what is called surplus or profit. That accrues to a small number of people, a board of directors in a private company, a set of government officials in a state enterprise. They then take that surplus, that profit, and they spread it around the society. Inequality depends on how they spread it around. For example, here in the United States, if the corporate chiefs give huge multi-million-dollar pay packages to top officials and everybody else doesn't get it, you can see growing inequality. If they take their surplus and spread it out as dividends to shareholders, it goes to another tiny group of people. If the workers themselves ran these enterprises, if they were run democratically, the distribution of these profits and surpluses would never happen that way. They'd be more equally distributed. That is the only way I can see that we could build into the system the kind of break on the inequality that is threatening us all, which, if we don't do something about it, is going to explode in social changes and tensions that I don't even want to think about.
Some interesting analysis there from Richard Wolff, the economist.